Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Verbal to Visual podcast. I am your host, Doug Neill, and on this show, you get to listen to one-on-one coaching calls that I have with folks who are developing and using their sketchnoting skills. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Brooke Summers Perry, who is exploring new forms of community and also new business models. This is a space that I am also pretty interested in, thinking about what online learning can look like, what type of learning communities we can gather together, and this is a fairly free-flowing conversation about those topics. You get to hear both my experience, particularly at this moment when I think I had just made a transition within Verbal to Visual over to this new platform, Mighty Networks, and how I simplified the membership process there. You'll get to hear me talk about that. You'll also hear about Brooke's model, which is quite a bit different, which I think provides for some nice comparisons. And along the way, you'll get to hear about Brooke's path into the world of visual thinking and how that's playing a role in the community that she's building. So I think this is a great episode for anyone who's interested in building community, helping folks master a skill that you're interested in and want to spend time with others exploring. For show notes to today's episode, as well as the video version of it, head on over to verbaltovisual.com/21. Let's get into it. All right, Brooke, welcome. Thank you so much for joining and chatting with us today about sketchnoting. I would love to throw it to you right away and give you a chance to introduce yourself, let folks listening and or watching know what you're up to generally, maybe a little bit about kind of how you got into sketchnoting, and then we can kind of segue into the specific work that you're doing and topics that you're interested in exploring, connected, some directly related to sketchnoting, but sometimes it's more about like what you're doing with your sketchnoting skills that might be the focus of our conversation today. So if that's not too much or too rambly of a first prompt, Brooke, I will throw it to you.
Yeah, well, you're giving me a great welcome because I am the rambler of all ramblers, I feel like at times, which is why sketchnoting is my go-to right now. So I'm looking at your sticky note that says, "Who are you? Where are you? So, and what sort of work are you up to?" So I am I'm a recovering architectural designer. I got my master's in architecture. And so I really fell in love with schematic design and, whiteboard sketching out ideas and concepts and brainstorming and all of that during school. And then riding the real estate waves of, the the bubbles and the bursts that happen in real estate, and having children and it not being super conducive to being the mom that I wanted to be during real estate booms. I actually busted with the real estate boom, and I just found it too hard to be a mom of two little kids and doing all of that work. I had a crisis of personal, professional, and spiritual notions. And this all becomes relevant to sketchnoting because I started taking a lot of workshops and had to go back and figure out who I was before I became a mom, had to go back and look at why I went into architecture, all those kinds of things in order to set myself on a path that really felt like wasn't reactive, but it's like making conscious decisions. So when I was taking all of those workshops, reading a lot of books, my niece says someone should give me a honorary PhD in self-help because I've read so many of those books and taken so many workshops. I think the training in architecture gave me pictures of this kind of visual storytelling that allowed me to piece together different concepts and integrate different modalities that I was learning, whether it was personality types or communication styles or the boatloads of parenting books I was reading. But I started blending different concepts and really seeing things in sketch notes. So I started sketching. My favorite modality, which is nonviolent communication, based on the work of Marshall Rosenberg. And that's what some of my sketch notes are at the bottom of this. I started, I would hear quotes. My first one I got a really clear sketch note picture of was this quote from Viktor Frankl about stimulus and response. I saw this as a picture. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. I saw that as like an old VHS player with a pause button and a play button and a fast forward button. And I started seeing examples. So I started sketching out what those stimulus and responses might be in parenting, what they might be in the boardroom, what they might be merging on the highway. So I started making sketches of this and sketching examples that people could relate to that made the work that I was studying and then began to teach more tangible for people. So it's not this concept of like, yeah, you can stop in the moment and not overreact and go off on somebody on the freeway. You actually have an opportunity to pause. And then all of this work in all kinds of different growth modalities, which are thankfully now making it into every part, like even in corporate world and team building and things like that. These ideas about, meditation and resetting your parasympathetic nervous system and all these kinds of things. So anyway, I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not, a PhD in any of these fields. But I found that sketching things out helped me get through these big concepts and distilling them into a way that I could teach them. And I did it on my own, just kind of mostly a very frustrated artist who couldn't find that middle ground between realism and conceptual. And I would get so bogged down at times with drawing and, just not being able to keep up with the information flow. And then when I saw your class, I was like, I need that. Like, I need this practice. Like everything I do is about practice. It's about helping people develop new habits. So I was so excited that I could develop this habit by taking your courses. And it came across my path while I was taking the community design class for Mighty Networks, because teaching these kinds of practices is the work that I'm up to right now. And so trying to create curriculums and content that use the sketch notes, not only in the curriculum, but also to help potential community members, learners, and leaders find us and connect with us through the storytelling, in our marketing. Marketing language really trips me up. So sketchnoting is helping me a lot with that. Like if I can tell the story in something that isn't using a catchphrase that everybody in marketing is using, then I'm a lot happier to use it. So
love it. Thank you for kind of mapping out part of the journey that got you to where you are here, where you are now. I think I resonated with a lot of what you described there, and particularly the power of sketchnoting as this visual storytelling tool that kind of gets at what you described there of almost giving artists permission, and this is probably a hard part for folks that come from a more artistic background, giving artists the permission to pull back on the realism in the things that they're drawing and putting out there. Because with sketchnoting, there's kind of this sweet spot, I feel like, within that spectrum from abstract to realistic that just provides a whole lot of opportunity for kind of relatively quickly capturing these ideas in a way that helps you work with them. Sometimes just internally with a lot of like self-help style books, if that's what you're doing. I spend a lot of my time like reading books about like creativity and productivity and even things within the realm of like meditation and more mental health oriented topics. So great is that internal sketchnoting can be that internal processing tool. But then also you can kind of flip it around and use it as a communication and teaching tool, which is what I see a lot of folks within verbal to visual doing, some of whom kind of have that idea from the start. Others kind of enter this world through their own personal interests, but then kind of see the opportunity to use it as a teaching tool and start moving in that direction as well. So for those reasons, I have no doubt that folks listening will kind of enjoy where you're going, even if they're not going in the exact same direction. Like a lot of the applications, there's a lot of overlap, I think, in the way that many folks are using sketchnoting in the way that it sounds like you are. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, kind of the specific things that you're up to, and maybe reference some of the visuals that you've added to our Miro board here?
Yeah, I think I can quickly get into like asking you a lot of questions about business structure and the mighty network structure and less about sketchnoting. One of the things I want to highlight about, because of what you put up there about abstract to realistic, I just want to, dovetail right with that.
Yeah.
It just dawned on me in the last couple of days that I'm putting together some curriculum for one of the beautifully rich types of environments that we teach in, which is a high school English program that has, I think it's 6 or 7 different languages spoken because
Wow.
of the different countries they've come from. And so I'm really excited to realize that Sketchnoting is going to make some of our social emotional learning that we're putting together as a curriculum available to students who don't speak the same language. So that's just, a huge shout out to what this tool can do when language is a real barrier.
Yeah.
And, during this pandemic, being able to give students coping mechanisms that are healthy and connecting and not, numbing, that's what we're going to be doing with the sketch notes. So we don't have to wait until they learn English, which is really difficult to do right now in the environment that we're in. So as I was making these sketch notes for our call and writing down what kinds of communities we want to be in with our programs, I realized that this multilingual classroom was going to be one of them.
Gotcha.
And that's exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
That's totally a bullet point in, this massive amount of words on my pages that I have here. But I think the biggest struggle that I'm having right now, the thing that I really want the most help with, are two things, and they're so related. One is this notion that you brought up on the last call that I was on with you about finding that sweet spot between having rich course content and plenty of it and supporting community. So I'm really curious how you're doing that, what you've learned you can, you can look at, there's the big question, but that's really what I'm trying to represent in those super compact sketch notes to the far left. That's what I'm getting at, because the nature of our business is we practice life. We practice everything that has to do with all aspects of life and growth in all sorts. And we have different facilitators and teachers. So there's a lot of different revenue streams potentially. But I love what you're looking at, or what you may have, already done, though I haven't exactly switched all the way over yet. But this idea about having a simpler membership structure, a simpler navigation system. I mean, the last thing I want anyone to do, if they find us and they find our content really helpful, I don't want them to get lost in the platform. And I want them to be able to find each other and find each other's, what's happening, inside your network, which is people supporting each other and sharing resources. And I just watched the video on feedback, like giving each other feedback. These are the tenets of what we're trying to establish in our community. Otherwise, our purpose wouldn't be met. If I were to back up and say, what is the purpose of We Practice Life? It's really to fill the gap between getting theory and practices from an expert and going to see a therapist and talk about what's not working, but that's the spot in between, which is applying the knowledge and practice and doing that in a community. That's the gap that we're trying to serve and to fill, and it not be through a religious tradition, which is where a lot of this used to happen, where communities of growth and transformation were done in church communities. And so that's my biggest challenge. I've had people come into the network and get lost. It's also multi-generational. So, we have a 20-something business partner who has no problem with platforms and digital navigation. And then we have, people in their 60s and 70s who've taken, meditation classes or things that I've taught that haven't quite made their way in here yet. So simple. I'm looking for simple, and I'd love to know what you've learned.
Yeah, that's some helpful context. And I guess I will just describe maybe kind of the current transition or current place that verbal to visual is in right now. And because we kind of just went through a little bit of a simplification with how we run verbal to visual, it has me thinking, even just earlier today, I was thinking about like, what if I had started with this model? Like, where might I be now? I mean, I feel really good about like the place verbal to visual is right now as a community, but it was interesting to think about kind of the starting from scratch perspective, or starting earlier in the journey with what I feel like I have learned. And the current model that we just switched to, like literally today, I just sent out an email kind of about what I hope is the final iteration of kind of a transition over the past, I guess, 6 months. Kind of like the start of COVID was when right about that time I switched over to Mighty Networks as a platform, because I wanted to lean more into the community side of online education. And when doing that, I had, I guess, about like 6 online courses that were already complete, and a 7th that was being developed. So I kind of got to see what it was like to bring courses that were already completed into the Mighty Network structure, kind of develop a course from scratch, more or less, within Mighty Networks, and kind of separately from those two things, also kind of run a community that had some regular webinars going on. And what might not be surprising is that those things were kind of unnecessarily siloed in the beginning, particularly like where the courses live and where the community activities take place. Um, and that's because from a subscription angle, or from what potential sketchnoters might be interested in, I knew that like some folks would only want to hop in and access the courses. So I kind of presented the community as this add-on for folks that wanted more regular interaction. And while that's probably true of folks coming into this work, I feel much better about where we ended up now, having just a single subscription option that has everything. So like people sign up for a reasonable monthly rate, get access to all the courses and these regular webinars that are going on within the community. And what most excites me about kind of that integration, there are many things. One being that like the folks that come in now, like everyone's on the same page. Everyone has access to like all of the things going on inside of verbal to visual. And from a course development standpoint, the way that I imagine building courses in the future is by kind of leveraging the weekly webinar structure that's already in place. So my plan with the weekly webinars that we now have, the first webinar of the month, I've kind of set aside as a monthly mastermind. So I think of that as an opportunity for folks to come in and chat about their own sketchnoting projects, talk through any challenges they're having, and identify next steps. But outside of that first webinar of the month, the rest of those webinars are connected to one of the courses that already exist, or like the current course that we're building. And there's something that I like about that flow of, if I imagine starting a new course sometime in 2021, essentially like dedicating maybe every other weekly webinar to that course. And each of those can just be like a relatively short lesson on the topic of that new course. And then lots of opportunity for follow-up discussion and sharing. And in that way, you would be building community through those weekly webinars, but then also having every other dedicated kind of to this course that you're building, and you're building live. You're also kind of building up one course at a time, and eventually you'll have the opportunity within those weekly webinars to present maybe all of the lessons that you would like to be in the standalone course. And you could choose either to have the course be just those live lessons and folks can go back and watch those, or you could do some polishing up where you kind of look back at those live lessons, maybe refine them, maybe record some more polished lessons to have a little tighter of an experience. So the way that I see it, that's like my favorite way of blending courses and community right now, that has, I think, a good balance of building and sustaining community momentum day to day, week to week, but then also creating these resources, this growing number of resources available for folks who come in and maybe want to go through that course that you built kind of live together. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Anything resonating there about what I just described?
Yeah, it does. It does. In fact, it's like the closest model that I could find of what we're trying to do with ours, as far as like really put community first. Would you change anything about the way you have topics and posting inside the courses? Like, would you pull any of that out into the regular activity feed, or I've taken one full course of yours and I'm in the middle of the next one, and I guess I'm trying to answer this question for myself. Would I?
Mm-hmm.
Where does it make sense to have the conversation with the whole group versus, what topics are specific enough that they need to, stay inside the course, so that they're not overwhelming folks who aren't taking that particular course? Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good
I
question.
just talked myself into a loop there.
No, I follow you, and that has been top of mind. That like exact issue has been top of mind for me as I just made this transition and kind of pulled some topics that used to live within the community branch of verbal to visual, brought those topics over to the network level within Mighty Networks, and now have essentially created both like opportunities but potential confusion for where folks should spend their time and where folks should share things that they're working on. And for folks not familiar with the kind of Mighty Network nomenclature, topics are essentially forums. So they're spaces that you can set up for particular conversations to take place. And because of the way that Mighty Networks is layered, you can choose to put those forums, those topics, kind of at the network level, which is kind of the highest level that folks see, and are kind of the most easily accessible. Or you can kind of nest as many topics as you want within individual courses. And the way that I have approached the use of topics within courses is that I tend to have one per unit. So as folks are working through an introduction to visual note taking, for example, some of the first units are about imagery, text, layout, and color. So each of those has their own topic within the course. And it's within those topics, that's where I encourage folks to share the follow-up work that I propose, like within the lessons there. Um, so with that in mind, I kind of encourage or think of the topics inside of a course as a place to share the follow-up work, the follow-up activities as they're working through a specific course. And then to, I guess, compare and contrast that to the network level topics, what's going on there. And this is a little bit of an experiment because I literally just this morning created these topics at the network level. So to be seen how this all plays out. But those network level topics, I think of them, I think with two scenarios in mind. One, someone that maybe finished a course, but is still kind of actively sketchnoting and wants to share their sketch notes, or has a question about sketchnoting that maybe isn't specific to a given course. And then two, some of those network level topics are connected to the new things that are going on each week and each month. So one of those network level topics is sketchnoting prompt, where like every Monday I'm going to hop in and share maybe a video or a podcast or something for the whole community to go sketchnote and then share and kind of compare, see how other people visualize the same ideas. That's also where those monthly mastermind webinars will live. There's a network level topic for that. Yeah, so I think that's how I would break down course topics being, if I try to summarize and also draw and write while talking, which I'm not very good at yet. I see them as, one topic per unit of the course. And then a place for folks to share follow-up work like specific to those lessons. I'm totally running out of space here. And with that in mind, since by creating topics connected to a given unit, and encouraging specific follow-up activity to be shared in those topics, what that results in is, some percentage of folks who go through that will share their work. A large probably won't,
Mhm.
because that's just, it's kind of hard to share works in progress, or some folks just want to, go through this process on their own. But as more people share their work, you can pull helpful examples. Like, you can pull some of that shared work and include it within the lesson itself. This is something that I have yet to do with verbal to visual, since us being on Mighty Networks is still pretty new. But one of my plans for early 2021, I hope, is to kind of go through each course, look at the work that's been shared, and pull some of that work into the lesson itself. Because then what folks will see when they first go through the lesson, they'll get to see like my instructional video and maybe some examples that I had already created. And then they get to see a bunch of examples of like real students, like real people who went through this course and what they did. And that's so beneficial to see how like other folks approach like the specific activities that you're encouraging, or yeah, and that could get at, I think, what one of your main intentions is, which is to bridge the gap between kind of theory and practice. When you see other people, real people practicing this thing, that might help bridge that gap.
Yeah, that's huge for what we're doing, because um, there's a lot of change makers and change agents that are kind of like on the leading edge of systems change as they do their own personal growth. They're also, finding new ways to shift the patriarchy, if you will, in
Mm-hmm.
different ways. And collaboration is everything. So I think that last point you just made is huge, because we're constantly learning from each other, and examples of how we can pull some of this work we've done on our own and in our personal lives into all of the different industries that we work in. And so I think being able to, being able to pull the feedback that's coming in through the topics into making the content better, and constantly improving the content, it's brilliant. And we learn a lot more. I mean, we are not, some of us do have, PhDs and expertise in other areas, and many of us are second career people who are integrating a lot of different things, and we learn as much from each other as we do from experts that we've been in front of. So this feels like a really good balance that should work for us as well. I think the only other question that from a business structure standpoint that's going to be a little bit tough for us is just like tracking the revenue. If we were to go over to a system like you're using right now, and we have, anywhere from 5 to 15 facilitators offering these courses, having them separate ticketed courses is a lot easier to do revenue shares with than than this kind of membership model.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, we'd figure that out, because I want it to be primarily, whatever's easiest and more valuable for people doing the work. But I also want to, sustain and empower the leaders in our network as well.
Yeah. What are your current thoughts, whether this is captured already within one of these sketches, or maybe more updated than that? Your current thoughts around
Yeah,
pricing structure and things like that.
The top two, like this one that you have on the screen right now, that's really showing what's free and what's paid. You can see that little note at the top. Currently, we have a free membership. We're basically using the lobby or the the first place you get to as our community area for everyone, and we are sharing resources. So similar to the way you described your using webinars and sharing resources. Our topics are based on replacing social media channels. So we have a channel for like quick ahas that replaces Twitter. We have a channel for
That's
photo
cool.
inspirations. So it replaces Instagram. And then we have resource share, that's Facebook. And then we have field trips, which is our basically Eventbrite. So, and then we have one for collaborating and networking that replaces LinkedIn. So that's what we're using our topics for in that free area. And we've only done a couple of podcasts, but our plan is to do something similar with the webinars that you were talking about, and having a show and tell, basically, so that people can, if they're doing creative expression work, they can show what they've been working on. They can read an excerpt from something they've written, or show, an expressive painting that they learned how to do in one of our courses, or reflect on one of the practices that they got from one of the practice modules. So because coming out of silos and integrating is everything, we wanted to make as much of that accessible as possible. And then we have basically 3 different tiers of paid programs and services. Are you familiar with Sketchy?
No.
I learned how to draw really well with Sketchy. They have these 30-day challenges of portraits. I had no idea I could draw people and make portraits, but they had this 30-day challenge. And so we're basically modeling our practice modules after them. The cost is like $1 a day. So you have a practice. This is kind of like what you were talking about, like giving everybody the same resource, podcast or something to Sketchnote, and everybody is sketching that same thing. That's what Sketchy does with portraits. So they have basically an inspiration photo per day, and everybody sketches that same photo. And it's really, really tight with community building and encouraging each other and learning things from each other. So that's what we're doing with like our favorite practices that we teach people. So you have a practice a day, it's $1 a day. So I think that makes it financially very accessible. And then we're going to encourage people to come back out into the free platform and reflect on what they learned from those practices. It's a little hard to talk about because we practice life means we practice art, we practice writing, we practice meditation, we practice, like, it's, it's everything. But
Yeah.
But I think these 3 things, the practice modules, the intensives, which are like 2-week or 3-week courses where you have very much like what you do with your courses. You have live events and like the first run of your course, basically.
Right.
Where you have, live events, and you also have curriculum and homework to do in between. And then we have the coaching area. So those are our kind of paid programs. And then we really want, everything else to happen in the community. We haven't really launched. We've invited people a couple different times, and really like beta testers, more like. And the first time we had a fee for our community. And we started with our facilitators, people who are going to teach the courses, and they didn't come into our network. Like 2 out of 14 people that signed up didn't use the platform. And I was like, oh, this doesn't look good. This doesn't feel good, because these were going to be my big people who are going to be gung ho about it.
Yeah.
And they didn't get in there. And then, so I was like, okay, well, let's say if they're teaching the courses, we're going to share revenue with them. We want them, to be our first ambassadors. We'll give it to them for free. And nobody came in, even when it was free. So that's when I'm like, what's happening here? But I also got feedback that we launched when everybody was zoomed out.
Right.
Like, people didn't want any more platforms. Like, just don't make me try another platform.
Yep.
So that's, that's the like voice that just keeps going off in my head. That like fear has that one by the ankles and is not letting that one leave my head. That like, you're just going to be sitting in here, party of one for a while. It's my fear.
And what have you done kind of additional door opening since that second one that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So I do a lot of talking to people about what they want and what they need. So we did a couple of live events in the park, and social distanced and got together, and then another idea came on about doing a venting poetry event. Because I work with cancer patients, where I make some pretty silly poetry prompts to help get some big emotions out. And so the child life team there at that hospital was like, we need to do that. So I did an event with them last week, and that have another one tomorrow. So we're trying that, or like, if you can't beat them, join them kind of thing. Like, if you really hate to be on technology, let's write some really irreverent poetry about how much we hate what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And, so that's what we're doing tomorrow. And then honestly, I got super excited about going back and sketchnoting a book that I wrote. And making it one of these practice modules.
Nice.
So that's what's firing me up right now.
Okay.
That's
great.
I had made this book of practices based on my favorite modality, and I can't read a book right now. And I'm thinking, well, maybe nobody can read a book right now. I've got a business team that hired me to do a team building retreat to teach them this content. And I thought, what if I make a practice module of the book with sketch notes instead of like read 4 pages a day and do a practice? How about you look at a sketch note, read a couple paragraphs, and do the practice? So that's what I've been doing this week, is just cranking that out as fast as I could get it.
Nice.
And that's what's underneath this is some of the sketch notes I did this week.
Yeah, these look great. And it's nice too that it sounds like you have this opportunity to develop these type of visual resources for an upcoming engagement, right? That has like a kind of a deadline to it, but then they're the type of things that I could see fitting real well within one of the practice modules that you described as being part of your network. And it does seem like the type of thing where you're gonna learn the most by letting folks in the door, seeing if folks come in the door, seeing like what types of offerings maybe like bring people into that community space in the first place, and then from there, what of those types of paid offerings are kind of the most appealing over time. And one of the things I'm thinking about here too is the desire to kind of get all of that structure right from the very beginning, but also the almost impossibility of that task, because you're not going to know until like people are interacting with it. So like giving yourself this like grace to be able to adjust some of the structures, and adjust the structures, the pricing, the some aspects of the model as people interact with it. I often find, and I feel like there's something that you mentioned when first kind of creating this mighty network and launching it. Uh, it often isn't until you put it out that you even know how you feel about it, until other people are interacting with it. I see that all the time with like, I don't know, whether it's a new course or something more structural related, or like, it's interesting how different like my feelings about it might be when I am first developing it. But then once you put it out there, it becomes this real thing, and you just see it from a different perspective as others interact with it. And then you kind of recognize like, oh, that doesn't feel right. Like I need to switch this thing or that thing, and that's okay too. Um, so it kind of am I accurate in describing that as this state that you're in terms of, you've got some good things out there and you're building out this structure, and now is a time when folks are interacting with it, and you're kind of using all of that to help inform where to go next, and if adjustments to structure need to be made.
Yeah, I think that that being in this is going to totally sound like I'm fangirling right now, but being in the sketchnoting area has helped me so much, because I tend to freeze right before like it's sink or swim time,
Mm,
and I get overwhelmed and I freeze. And, these are always the moments I look back on and go, oh, you were so close. But to have you, honestly, on that last call, for you to say, we started out this way, but now we're going to change, that made me think, first of all, I feel, super grateful that you're this accessible, so I can say, help me, because I just, went out on a limb, and it's not, how do I reboot all those plans or shift people over or whatever. But that's what scares me. But also the this notion that following the need, like everything I do is following the need. And I always get tripped up when I overthink it. Like if I just listen to what people want, and this is the part that's so inspiring. You just do what you love, it seems like, and people just are like, yeah, keep doing that, And I feel like that I haven't given myself that kind of freedom yet. I'm always thinking, and I think it's probably what's embedded in me from architecture days, where like every hour had to be a billable hour. So
right.
I'm constantly putting this pressure on myself and saying, like, if I don't get it right, I'm wasting so much time. But the truth is, I love doing this stuff. So this friend of mine who I'm doing this team building retreat for, she called me out of the blue and said, did you hear Brene Brown's latest podcast? You have to listen to it. My team really loved it, and they want to implement some of the things we learned. And I know that's the kind of stuff you teach. So I immediately went and listened to the podcast and sketchnoted it and sent it to her. I actually ended up laminating it for her team. And then I'm tying what was in that they love to the lessons that I'm teaching them. And I could do that kind of stuff night and day. The tricky thing is not getting too in my head about what the return on my investment's going to be.
It's hard to not go there, especially when that model was like the the basis of like the first part of your career, right? As you mentioned, like billable hours. And I have a bit of that experience too, and resonate with uh, the difficulty, but also like with all these things, there's difficulty, but there's opportunity in kind of getting out of that kind of trading time for money um, model, I guess, because of yeah, I mean, many of the structures and the kind of community dynamics that we've been exploring have this experience where you're doing something to capture what you're creating in the moment, in a given hour, in a given day, and make that thing a resource that's available in the future, and that has this uh, recurring value. And that kind of ties in with what I sketched out here while you were talking, and this might have came up on the recent webinar too, but finding this intersection of like what you love doing and what other people find valuable. Uh, and it takes a lot of experimenting, I think, to identify that intersection, for the people that like are currently paying attention to your work, right? Because another part of it is like, how do people even find what you're up to? And there are a whole lot of like challenges and again opportunities there, but uh, yeah, seeking out that sweet spot, that intersection, and I think over time you can even kind of grow um, how much time is spent there.
Yeah. Yeah. Honing in on it. I think the other thing that's like interesting, because a lot of what I do does border on spiritual growth. I don't compartmentalize these things, personal, professional, and spiritual, because we're like the same person that walks into the office or goes or walks into the door at home after work, and but a lot of the work that I've done has been offered for free as part of a church or a church community. So people aren't used to applying a dollar value to that. And so it's really hard not to be black and white about it. Like billable hours versus what's typically thought of as volunteer work. And yeah, so there's a whole lot of this just finding the balance. That's why I put that orange post-it there, is finding balance in a lot of different ways, finding the sweet spot, and like you said, get in there and see if there are ways that it grows out of the love for the work. It's a big, in some ways it's a big big leap of faith, to put in so much time and effort, and and hope that it's building on something people are going to find value in.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I have certainly found value in all of the things that you did, where you, at some point, you were in that same place, building all of the content. So that's where this is. Let's see if there's anything else. I feel like we covered so much, and I got some good clarity. I really like this tool. I didn't draw in it as much as I thought I would while we were talking, but I can't follow more than one channel at once. The
Oh
older
yeah.
I get and the later in the day it gets harder.
Oh, I totally get that. It's yeah, I think as I mentioned, like talking while drawing or writing, like is still really hard for me. And I guess that's part of the reason I want to do it in chats like these, because it's a skill that I want to try to get better at. Because it is challenging. And even if you didn't do a bunch of drawing live here, as I think I mentioned, the resources that you brought in prior to our conversation have been very helpful and interesting to see.
Yeah, I will have to do some of my own practices tonight when I go to bed. This one that's beneficial regret, that's kind of in the bottom left-hand corner. That's what I'll be doing tonight when I'm second guessing everything that I said, and telling myself that it wasn't valuable to the rest of your listeners. I'll have to remind myself that what the feedback you just gave, that there is some contribution and exploration and discovery that people will get from this.
No
So
doubt. Yeah,
that's
I
how
have no
I
doubt.
will be try to remember that later today.
I like that. Do you have some specific follow-up actions or thinking or steps that you would like to identify as a way to kind of start to wrap up our conversation? Or do you feel like some thinking and some mulling over is required before kind of defining some next steps?
I'm thinking in several different layers right now. I think certainly the content in the coursework that I have right now answers so much of my questions as they relate specifically to sketchnoting, about getting more practice, about I'm still using more words than I would like to be using. So practicing some more icons, making my own library about growth and transformation, and symbols that will be used, that I'll be using frequently for that. So that's my, that's a next action for my skill building on sketchnoting. I think when it comes to the business structure, just having this conversation, I'm going to remind myself to not try to make a one-to-one relationship with the billable hours and the amount of time that needs to be spent in order to kind of build the library that I want to build and that I want our team to be building. I need to release myself from that. And then there was another one, but it's gone because I got lost in my own words.
That happens to me all the time.
Just what happens.
One thing that I was meaning to mention too, on the kind of topic of billable hours and I guess the growth and strengthening of like the financial foundation that's underpinning the work that you and other instructors, facilitators, the other folks that are involved with what you're creating. I try to remind myself and even like create a structure. I guess this is the most clear now that like the way that new folks come into verbal to visual is through this monthly subscription. It's this kind of like slow but consistent growth model. Like, is there a way to continue moving forward where you can be creating these new resources at like a sustainable pace? Like pace is something that I think about, and that's where for me those weekly webinars are helpful, because they're opportunities to like build educational materials at a consistent pace over time. Is there a way to kind of I guess bridge together the pace of new resources and the opportunities for like financial support in return for those resources? Like, if that trend is going in the positive direction, like that's something that I try to focus on. And I guess it's that has kind of helped me switch or avoid the billable hours mindset a little bit, if I can see that, okay, this is moving in the right direction, and I can kind of like I can see the trajectory and I like the way that it's going. Sometimes like that's what I have to tell myself, even in given weeks or months where like the financial situation maybe isn't great right now, like, but the model that I'm using and the trajectory that I see, like, I like where that's going. And it sounds like that's kind of, I guess, what you're searching for. So I don't know if that's helpful to
Yeah.
point it out in that way, but that dynamic kind of came to mind.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be a change in the angle of the trajectory before I can feel very
Right.
comfortable. Like it's
Right.
super flat right now. Um, and yeah, so I'm definitely still in a bit of a leap of faith on that. Um, and I'm also trying to, I don't want to water down the work that I'm doing by, trying to find different revenue streams in the meantime. I've had a tendency to do that in the past, which makes me this like, I've had a new career every 3 to 5 years, for the last 15 years, because I've been working on this particular vision since 2005 and all of the different iterations that it's taken. And then I, jump ship and go do another job full time because the money scares me. So I'm trying really hard not to do that. And most recently, I was teaching art and creative writing in schools. And then when COVID hit, those gigs, because they weren't, they were more like ancillary classes than the core classes, that work got nixed. So that income hasn't been replaced. So yeah, there's some extra factors on top.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's a challenging
So then I
time.
start thinking, looking into the other class that you talked about, where getting some gigs doing sketchnoting for other people, I could, certainly keep practicing and doing that work. So that was the third idea that I had to put on the pink Post-it that I forgot,
Yeah.
was like entertaining the idea of finding, some paid gig work, while I hone in on my sketchnoting skills and
Yeah. Well, I can
do
tell
what I
from
love.
yeah, I can tell from I mean, kind of all the visuals on the left here, especially the ones, well, yeah, both the way that you outlined your Mighty Network, but then also the kind of these cool one-page summaries. Uh, you've got the visual skills to do that. In terms of like seeking out sketchnoting, seeking out some paid sketchnoting gigs. So I see that as a
Yeah.
possibility.
And I definitely like when I first went on your website and I saw, the bullet points of, what types of people would love, this kind of work. It's like, I teach because I always want to learn. So,
Mm,
I did medical illustration for Baylor College of Medicine while I was in college, and, learned all kinds of things about biophysics and, stuff, just because I had to know it enough to draw it. So, that's another thing I love about this, is that it gives me an excuse to keep learning new information all the time. So
yeah,
good
that's a fun thing
stuff.
about sketchnoting,
Mm-hmm.
is that it can be applied to any topic, any industry, and if you're able to find that, I guess another intersection, or um, yeah, find places where you can sketch note for other people around topics that you're already interested in. Like, you get to learn cool new things along the way and make these kind of valuable visual artifacts and resources for those specific folks and that specific setting.
Awesome. Well, I have gone way over the time allotted for this, but I am just noticing how much you were drawing and filling out those Post-it notes while we were talking. So there's progress. I didn't.
Yeah, well, that's all good. You've got this Miro board to return to. This is going to stay available. You can kind of come back to this whenever you want. I'll also kind of save it as an image and send that to you as well. Just to have that as a recap of some of the things we chatted about today.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for being available and, being part of that community that you're building. I'm learning so much from other students as well. And yeah, it's really inspirational to just get out there and go for it and figure out what's working for people and what's not, and adjusting. So I'm going to put that in the front of my head as I move into doing this work with more heart and less fear.
That sounds great. That might be a great note to end on. Thank you for the kind words about what's going on inside Verbal to Visual. I love having conversations like these, so I appreciate you bringing your work and your full self and all your questions and cool projects as well. And I wish you luck in continuing those explorations, and feel free to reach out in the future for follow-up questions or conversations.
I probably will. Thanks.
All right. Sounds good, Brooke. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. I hope that you enjoyed our conversation and that it sparked some ideas for how you might approach building a community, helping others master a skill that you're interested in and have some experience with, and maybe even using sketchnoting as a tool to communicate what's going on and facilitate those experiences. If you would like to join a global community of sketchnoters, then come check out Verbal to Visual. A membership to our online learning platform gets you a ton of complete at your own pace online courses to help you build and use your sketchnoting skills in different ways. You'll get access to weekly live workshops where we do deep dives into specific sketchnoting topics, and you'll get to share your own work as you make things and also see the work of other sketchnoters that I have no doubt will inspire you. To learn more about that and sign up, head on over to verbaltovisual.com, and to get to the specific show notes for today's episode, just add a /21 at the end of it. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I look forward to sharing another conversation with you soon. Till next time.